In life, we all encounter obstacles, and those obstacles come in all different shapes, sizes, and forms. The question is, how do we handle those obstacles? Do we attack them head on, or do we allow them to make us quit? Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up on themselves, their dreams, or their goals. We will interview successful people from all walks of life as they share their no-quit stories when they had the choice to give up or give in, but they didn't. We thank you for listening, and we hope to be that jolt of positivity as you go for your greatness. Welcome to episode number 205 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is impact. Our quote of the day comes to us from Jamie McCall. You don't have to make it big, but you do have to make a big impact. Today's episode is sponsored by the good people over at West Fair Communications, who publish the Westchester County Business Journal and the Fairfield County Business Journal. These newspapers do a wonderful job in covering all aspects of the business world within two of the most influential markets in the New York metropolitan area. You can also take advantage of their daily news feeds, which keep track on the companies and thought leaders in these important regions. For more information, take a look at www.westfaironline.com. Trust me, once you start reading, you won't quit. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. As I'm working on my first book, it was an honor to interview Mike Flynn for our show. Mike sent me an advance copy of his new book, Master the Key, and I really enjoyed it. He shares some of that with us, and I hope you enjoy today's episode. Mike, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
I am pumped to be here, man. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I appreciate it. So the first question we ask everybody is, are you ready to bring it today?
Dude, you have to know that everybody listening better brace for impact, because what's going to happen today is through our conversation, Chris, we are going to begin to remind people of who they are created to be and the potential they have within them. And when you become who you are created to be, you better brace for impact.
That is awesome, and I'm still trying to figure that out for me, so maybe I'll take some extra notes today.
Bust out your pens and paper.
So as we were talking about before we went live, the number one objective of our show is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never give up. And I was curious if you have either a no-quit story of your own or perhaps a really challenging time that you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
Absolutely. I think that, take it back to 2009, the financial crisis. I'm sitting in the living room of my house at a small green desk looking out the window. I've got my 18-month-old daughter behind me watching Little Einsteins and my 3-year-old daughter playing at the table with Play-Doh or something. And my 18-month-old starts crying, and she wants her sippy cup, which is over there on the stairs. And she didn't want to get up because it would disturb her Little Einstein episode. So I got up to go give it to her. And as I'm bending over to pick up this sippy cup, my back goes out. I'm home alone. I'm on the floor in excruciating pain. I thought that I was having a heart attack. I actually didn't realize that it was my back that had gone out, but pain shot through my whole entire body, and I can't move. And all I have are my 3-year-old daughter and my 18-month-old daughter. Nobody else is home. And my 3-year-old gets the phone. I can't get a hold of my wife, so I have to call my mother, and she has to go pick up, at that time, her 250-pound son off the floor and take him to urgent care. That was a wake-up call, because I had hit some pretty significant levels of success early on in my career, and the financial crisis pretty much blew up in my face. My physical health, my financial health, my mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, it all blew up. And I was trying to force my way through. I was trying to not give up on this house that I overbought. I was trying to not give up on X, Y, and Z. But what I actually had to do was surrender. Actually, the not quitting, it seems kind of counterintuitive, But not quitting on my family meant letting go of my ego and my pride and everything that I had necessarily believed in and associated my self-worth in. And in 2010, a few months later, we end up short selling our home. And that was because it was either my health continues to go down to the crapper, and I end up ruining my family spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, or I let go of this anchor and all of the ego that had been associated with it. And that's my no quit story.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us, and I think one of the best parts of the show is when we ask that question, because it gives us a little bit of feedback not only into the guest, but more importantly, what they were kind of going through during those times. And wanted to just kind of follow up that is when you were going through that in the crisis of 2008, 2009, and obviously short selling your home in 2010. What was it that you were putting in front of your mind or your eyes, or what was it you're putting in your ears? What was it that you were reading or doing that kept you going? Because obviously, very challenging time, and you had to remove, as you said, your ego. But what is it that you did on a day-to-day basis that kept you going?
I wasn't real. That's the problem, actually. I wasn't really putting anything valuable in front of my eyes or in my body. I wasn't really reading. It was still pretty early in the podcast world. And the very first thing I actually put in front of my eyes that I would credit with the turning point was, well, let me back up actually a second, because I had in 2007, I had formulated a mastermind group of other second generation entrepreneurs around the country. Um, and there were 9 of us. And so we were meeting once a year and stuff like that. And talking about businesses and best practices and family drama and all that stuff. Well, I was burnt out at this point by the end of 2010. And, I had short sold my house. I had basically burned through all of the capital that I had in the bank, and, and had essentially emotionally decided that I was going to make a career change. And so I went to our 2011 meeting with the intention of telling all of these other 8 people that I was out, that I was moving on, that I could no longer do it. So I almost quit. But one of my dear friends, Jesse, gave me a book by a guy named Kevin Hall called Aspire: Discover Your Purpose Through the Power of Words. And that book revealed to me the incredible power and authority that words have in our life over our subconscious as well as our conscious, and understanding the meaning and the origin and the etymological uh, history behind a word, and the fact that we are spending 90% of our time in the quiet conversation of our mind. So I wasn't putting anything in front of my eyes or in my mouth or in my ears that was good. I was just saying that you're a loser, Mike. You're a failure. You you were successful, but look what you did. You made bad choices, and you're worthless, and you're fat, and you're unhealthy, and all of these things. That was the conversation that I was having in my head, and I was feeling discouraged, right? And I knew I was feeling discouraged, but then I found out what the actual meaning of the word discouraged means. The word courage means heart. Okay? So to encourage something means to add to the heart. To discourage something means to take or cut from the heart. And so what I realized was, man, I need to I need to figure out what is taking from my heart. And the purpose of my career is not to fill my coffers with money, and not to buy my wife and kids all the prettiest things and toys. Those are nice. I'm not poo-pooing those things, but my purpose is to have a game-changing impact in the lives of others by helping them take ownership of the stories and the adversities and the challenges and the setbacks and the hopeless, seemingly hopeless failures that they've experienced. And when I became cognizant of that, my life opened up, and things started to turn the corner, and I started putting those books in front of my eyes and those podcasts in front of my ears, and seeking people out, and developing what I refer to as my future five, which Jim Rohn talks about the average of your five people. But I broke it into categories: faith, family, fitness, friends, finances, and fun. And I came up with five people for each of those categories. And I surrounded myself with them. Some of them I went belly to belly with. Other people I don't know, but I was able to access their brain through their books or through their voice. And I know that that's something that you're really big on, is what you're consuming, because what you consume is what you create. And naturally, when we're consuming things that are good for us, the output is good. We have more energy. We feel alive. We're productive. And that happens both in our physical life, in the types of food and nutrition that we consume, as well as our spiritual, mental, emotional life.
No, that was a couple minutes, but that was like 9 hours worth of value. So I appreciate that. Wanted to just ask you to touch on your future five. So it's faith, family, finances.
It's faith, family, fitness, finances. Wait, sorry. It's faith, family, fitness, friends, finances, and fun, in that order.
It's a good order. And you said something that I could not agree more with, is what you consume is what you create. And I think you touched on some really interesting things. But that to me is something that I realize, and I'm listening to or reading The Untethered Soul right now, and it talks about all the conversations you have with yourself, and whether it's something as daily affirmations or things you read or write or quotes, the power of what you tell yourself is so important. But more importantly is you, myself, all of our listeners, we have the ability to change channels. So, for example, if you're
Hmm.
telling yourself that you're ugly or you're a failure, it doesn't mean that you change and say something differently and all of a sudden you immediately believe it and feel it. But when you say it over and over again, it's got so much power. So wanted to ask you, Mike, if you wouldn't mind just quickly telling our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do today.
So, yeah, Mike Flynn, a second generation entrepreneur in the financial services space, still do that. But in 2015, I felt this call to do something more scalable, to begin to live into what I feel I was created to do in terms of having a game changing impact in the lives of others and in the world. And to that end, I created something called the Impact Entrepreneur Show. And I didn't necessarily have a vision for it. I just knew I needed to do that. And I think that that's an important point for people. When you know that you need to take action, you don't necessarily need to wait to have your vision fully mapped out. You just need to start moving. And the barrier to entry to start a podcast is pretty low. You need a microphone and an internet connection, and a guest or your own thoughts. And I knew that I wanted to learn from these people about their the impact moments of their life, and how it changed the trajectory that they were on, and how they are using that to have a game changing impact in their tribes and their communities. And I just wanted to bring up something. Actually, I was listening to an episode you did with Rudy Rudiger, and he actually is a perfect example of this, right? He had belief in himself, right? And somebody recently invited me onto their podcast, and they said, "You're a thought leader and we want to have you on our show as a thought leader." And I sat back and I had this kind of aha moment where I realized, wait a second, we are all thought leaders. We are leading our thoughts each and every day, hopefully, or our thoughts are leading us. And Rudy Rudiger is a perfect example of somebody who was leading his thoughts. He was a thought leader, and he believed in his capacity. He believed in his ability. He knew it was going to take time. As he said on your podcast, he prepared 27 years for 30 seconds, right? Uh, he, he tried to get that movie made for 10 years. It took 30 days to film. Like, we have to believe in ourselves. We have to drive and control our thoughts, because each and every one of us, whether we are aware of it or not, is a thought leader. So which thoughts are you leading today?
That's I appreciate the fact that you mentioned Rudy. He's become a buddy, not a close buddy in any way, but he's become a buddy of mine as well as my father's. But Rudy just epitomizes what you just said, and he epitomizes the whole concept idea behind what no quit living is all about. And you touched on something that I thought was really important. You touched on the fact that we are all thought leaders, and it reminds me of a book that Mark Sanborn wrote, which is You Don't Need a Title to Be a Leader. And I think that's something that a lot of people miss, and it's one of the things that I'm passionate about passing on to future generations. Is we all have the opportunity to make change and make positive change, and it's not easy, it's not simple, but we all have that opportunity. So whether you're on a sports team, whether you're on a club, whether you're in a family, whether you're on a corporation, we all have the opportunity to have a positive impact, and I'm just glad you touched on that. But wanted to ask you, if you had to, Mike, define yourself, but you could only use one word, what would that word be?
Impact.
What if I said you couldn't use that word? No, just kidding.
if
So
I couldn't use that word, the other word would be insightful.
you're not allowed to use I words.
I'm not allowed to use I words.
No, just
Okay.
kidding. No, those are two great words, and I think the time that I know you, I think those are both very important words for what you do and how you do it. But I think the word impact goes to kind of for me, the positive word is everybody can have, a positive change, can make a positive difference in people's life, and you can fill it in with, positive impact. And I think the reality is it goes down to one of our favorite words, which is action, is at the end of the day, the beginning of every day. It doesn't matter what idea, concept, book, podcast, if you don't take action, it's irrelevant. So I'm glad that you touched on that. And we often identify and look at people's morning routines. And I was curious, Mike, if you had a morning routine that you swear by.
I absolutely do. I wake up between 5 and 5:30. I use an app called Sleep Cycle, and it wakes me up when I'm coming out of a REM cycle, following the circadian sleep rhythm, and so that I wake up and I don't feel groggy. And then the very first thing I do is get up and go turn on the coffee and make my wife a cup of coffee and myself a cup of coffee, and bring it back to her. And then we both have about 30 to 40 minutes of prayer and meditation time, where we are either sitting in silence, we are reading a devotional of some kind, we are writing, we're coloring. Um, there's this great practice, a spiritual practice. It's in Latin. It's called Lectio Divina, and it basically means divine reading. And um, and so you can take like a poem, you could take a piece of scripture, you could take an inspirational content, and you can read it, and you can meditate on the words that that pop up to you, that speak to you. And so I did this recently. I started reinstituting this into my morning routine, and one of the words that reappeared for me was revelation, was revealing. And all of us, I grew up, my mom is a gardener, and she specifically roses, and we have roses all over our childhood home. And as I was looking at, like, meditating on that word, I just started thinking about the process of a rose becoming a rose from the moment that it's planted in the ground until the moment it's pruned so that it can grow again. And it's interesting because the manifestation of that rose begins the moment the seed is planted, right? So one of the questions that I actually have in my book, you talked about action, and one of the the there are three questions that you need to ask yourself when you are trying to figure out whether or not you should take action, or whether you should, or what kind of action you should take. The first question is, what's at stake? The second question is, why does it matter? And the third question is, when does it become real? And the moment that Chris, the moment that Mike, the moment that your listeners think about going to the gym, think about becoming fitter, think about starting that business, it becomes real. The moment that you go in line to get your morning Starbucks, that doesn't, that it becomes real the moment you start driving to Starbucks. That coffee is real. It's not real only when you have it in your hand.
It's interesting that you spoke about it that way, and as you were saying it, I was kind of listening to, and I wasn't sure where you were going with it, but I agree with it. I think it starts before, and I think that's where a lot of people have that disconnect, and I appreciate you touching on that. Speaking of books, before we jump into your book, I wanted to ask you if you're reading anything currently, or perhaps you've read something recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
Yes, I'm actually reading the biography of Ulysses S. Grant. Uh, and I'm moving through it slowly. It's a huge work by Ron. I forget how to say his last name. He's the same guy that wrote Hamilton. Um, but Ulysses S. Grant was an incredible leader, and he was forced to go to West Point by his dad, who was a gregarious character, uh, and he didn't want to go. In fact, he was hoping that he would get asked to leave. And simultaneously, he was also trying to make a name for himself in business, but time and time again, his business ventures failed. So it's an interesting juxtaposition. You have a guy who doesn't want to go to West Point, goes to West Point, ends up excelling at West Point, wants to be a successful business guy. His business endeavors never work out, but he's a consummate leader. And then he ends up becoming a general of the Union Army, and then ends up becoming the president of the United States, right? So it's an interesting. I'm obviously shortcutting it, but I would highly recommend people read that book, because there's a lot of lessons about leadership, about being who you were created to be and not being who you think other people want you to be, and allowing others to see the greatness and potential in you and pushing you toward it.
I think it's really neat when people share different books and different reasons and different things. And I wanted to just touch on your book really briefly is Master the Key, which you were kind enough to send me a copy, and I read it. And I just wanted to ask you, for the listeners that obviously have enjoyed this interview so far, what's the best way for them to get that book, or what's the best way for them to find out more about your book?
So the book will be live on Amazon on April 29th, uh, 2019. Master the Key: a story to free your potential, find meaning, and live a life on purpose. And April 29th, it'll be available on Amazon, and then shortly after that, it'll be available on Barnes and Noble and other places. Um, they can send a text message. I've set up a special text line uh, specifically for people who are interested in the book. They can text the word key to this number, 831 6 1818, and they will receive a form to complete so that I can send them a free gift, a tool I created called the Clarity Scorecard, which is an assessment that they can use to score themselves in in several different domains. Um, and then I will be able to keep them in the loop on the progress of the book. I'm not sure when this is going to air, but that number will be active. It's active before the launch. It'll be active after the launch.
No, it's awesome, and I appreciate you sharing that. And for those that are interested in your podcast, what's the best way for them to get that?
Yeah, so the podcast is called The Impact Entrepreneur Show. It's available on Spotify. It's available on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Google Play. So it's The Impact Entrepreneur Show. And we interview all kinds of people. We've had people from Mel Robbins to Lou Holtz to John Gordon to Jocko Willink I had on the show early on. To everybody in between, um, who and the unifying thing is that, and it's not about status, it's not about celebrity, it's about that they are responding to the impact moments of their life and using that and giving it back to the world to have a game changing impact on the lives of others. My show is not a how to show, how to launch something and make yourself $1 million, because I think those are really, frankly, useless conversations. They're not, well, not useless. They're not interesting, um, because at the end of the day, if we can master our identity, which is the key, who we are, how we engage in the world, what we do when we get there, and who we do it with, if we can master those things, then we've mastered the key, and the outcome of being a billionaire becomes less important.
No, I like how you mentioned that is, and it's the difference of a how to show or how to do this in 3 weeks or 30 days, and it's more along the lines of conceptualizing certain things, and I think you've done a great job on that. So one of the things that we're extremely passionate about is the word accountability. I wanted to ask you, Mike, what does accountability mean to you?
Accountability means having people that can correct you when you are off track. So the last piece of the key in the book, the key is made up of four pieces: story, gifts, action, and community. And your environment matters, but who you allow in your environment matters more. And the signs of a really great, thriving community are that they are wildly curious about you more than they are about themselves, that they desire to collaborate with you, and that they correct you when they see you going off track and not being the amazing, awesome human being that you are. And that they've earned the right to speak into your life and to say, you know what, Mike, you could really be doing better here. You're not showing up the way that you were created to show up here. Why aren't you at the gym? Why aren't you putting in the time, the effort, the energy? Why aren't you making those phone calls? What's going on in your life that's pulling you away from this? What lies are you speaking to yourself?
No, I love how you touch on that because I think for us it falls into the category of, in essence, accountability partners, and I love that. And one of the things we're doing now is we are on this mission of paying it forward with positivity, and we're doing all different things. And I was just curious, what does the idea or the concept pay it forward mean to you?
I absolutely love that concept. I've been seeing you on social media putting notes and stuff on people's cars. Um, and I think it started with someone putting a note on your car, right?
Kind of. It didn't, but literally within a day, somebody put a note on my car, and it kind of just
Oh,
changed the
okay.
whole perspective of it. But it was just something that we wanted to do as a company, and I have a bunch of people that are helping us do it, and it's been awesome.
Yeah, so it's cool. So there's this word called genshai, and I this is another word that I learned about um, in that book, Aspire, Discover Your Purpose Through the Power of Words. And it's an incredibly powerful word, and it sums up the golden rule in one word. And it literally means never treat another person in a manner that makes them feel small, including yourself. And Kevin Hall, the author of that book, created these coins that have the word and the definition of the word on them, called the Genshai coin. And so what we'll do is oftentimes we'll have this coin in our pocket, which I have one right now. I'm looking at it, and you hold on to it as long as you need it. And then when you encounter someone who needs to be reminded that they are a powerful, amazing, brilliant human being and that they should not treat themselves small or anyone else, you can pass this coin along and remind them that they are worthy, that their value is timeless, that they are always relevant, and that they are never losing relevancy, that their relevance score is always 100, no matter where they are.
That's awesome. And it just obviously goes hand in hand with kind of what we try to do on a day-by-day basis. But I wanted to ask you, Mike, what's the best way for our listeners to connect with you and find out more about you, whether that's your website or social media?
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook. I have the Impact Entrepreneurs on Facebook. At Instagram, my handle is the Impact Mike, and I love Instagram. I'm going to be doing a lot more stuff there. And again, if people text me that number, they will actually hear from me. They'll get an automated form to complete, but I'm able to respond individually to each person that messages me on that line. It's not a robot. It's actually me typing behind the message, and I'm happy to help people. I know that there's a lot of people suffering silently in this world. I was one of them. I know there's a lot of men who have this hard shell and are walking through life thinking and making everybody think that they are this impervious creation. But I know that we all have a lot of wounds that we alone possess the ability to heal. And we've been given everything that we need to provide ourselves with that healing.
So speaking of that healing, and I love what you said about especially men, but we're all suffering in some ways from something, and wanted to ask you before we let you go if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners.
I would like to just share a quote from one of my favorite quotes. It's by this guy named Charles Reed, I believe, is what he I think it was the guy that coined it, and it's sow a thought, reap an act. Sow an act, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap your character. Sow your character, and reap your destiny. And those would be my final words.
I think that is a perfect way to end another great episode of our podcast, and just wanted to again thank you, Mike, for your time, and definitely to our listeners, check out Mike's podcast. And as a individual that has read his new book, it's a great read. It's a quick read, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but I mean that is we're all busy with a ton of things, but I think having those things that you can devour pretty quickly, the likelihood of us finishing it is more likely than not. But definitely please connect with Mike and check him out on social media. And I just want to thank you for your time, and I appreciate everything that you brought today.
You bet, man. And Michelangelo, I believe, or Leonardo da Vinci, or one of those two geniuses, said that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And I wanted to make my book simple but insightful.
Well, I think you've done that, and again, I appreciate it, and we definitely need to connect again soon.
Right on, brother. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to episode number 205. Mike is clearly focused on making an impact on others, something that fits very nicely with our Pay It Forward with Positivity mission. Mike shared how at a tough time in his life, he was introduced to a book titled Aspire, and that book had an impact on his life and the words he told both himself as well as others. It helped him to re-examine the conversations he was having with himself, something that I think we can all do a much better job with. The power of our words have an impact not only on ourselves, but on so many other people as well. What are you telling yourself? What are you reading? What are you watching or listening to? I challenge you today, as you go for your greatness, to take a very specific look at what you read, watch, and listen, but then also observe, as a result, which you tell both yourself and others. Our words and our voices are extremely powerful. Use them to inspire, motivate, and lift others up. Choose positivity with your words, and be kind to yourself and others.
And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.